As you know, most people nowadays are being touched by a slightly hedonist streak. No, not you, of course. And you see that in modern spirituality, where the pleasure principle very often is more important than the actual healing principle. People like to escape their suffering, and in exchange for that, they try to focus on how to feel better, and that can sometimes go at the expense of the morality of how they get to that moment. So their actually healing doesn't really happen. They just feel more comfortable. And this is more or less the same as what modern medicine offers people. They offer you methods through which you can undo the feeling of suffering of your body, but not necessarily the actual suffering. My dear friends, you know that the world is plagued by many different kind of problems, and people try to escape their problems in all kind of ways. Today we are going to talk about the sexualization of spirituality, and we're going to talk about that in the relationship of sexuality, sensuality, and tantric practice. And I want to rectify a few ideas that people have in here. So I hope you are giving me your willing eyes and ears so that you can be better informed about what things are and what they are not. Because what I usually see from the big heroes on the internet or in the book world, I see them talk about all kind of things which actually originate all from a Mr. Quimby. This was a student of mesmerism, and he came up with this idea of sexual tantra as it is being practiced nowadays, and that is still being practiced, and it is a sort of a mixture of psychotherapy and sexuality and all kinds of other things, and of course modern energy work, which stems out of this same kind of ideas of mesmerism. And in this I'm going to talk to you about specifically the East Asian forms in the way how they have been manifesting throughout history, and where they are different from what people nowadays do, and why they are different also will become clear throughout the story. And this is a large subject because there is, in spite of the fact there's not too much written about it, it is a big topic. Some people call this nowadays sexual qigong, and let me tell you, there is no such thing as sexual qigong. So this is the first thing. There are sexual practices, and they are usually not exactly what you think they are. For instance, let me mention Tibetan sexual practice. The Tantric practice in Tibetan Buddhism is the intentional sexuality between you embodied as a Buddha or a Bodhisattva with an Bodhisattva also at the same time. There is the witchcraft from India, which is called Tantra, which sometimes uses sex magic. There is, of course, then the dual cultivation from China, and this dual cultivation is not necessarily the same as any of all the other things. In some practices, especially in the West, the pleasure principle is very important. The reaching of an ecstasy is very important. And in the original dual cultivation of Chinese culture, that is not the case. When you look at what is nowadays called sexual qigong, this goes beyond the normal sexual work that people do, because it works directly with qi, and this qi flows through the human being. Well, this qi is already a problematic thing, because qi is an indication of perfection, and most people are not perfect, let alone that their body is going to function perfectly. So there is something else. So it is the yang usually that is floating, or it is the waters that are floating. And for men and women, the principles are different, and we're going to talk about that level also later on. In the discussion about sexual qigong, they usually talk about this works with deeper physical, emotional, mental, and psychological dimensions, and potentially the psychic realms. And in this case, when we talk about sexual practice in China, it would work with the Ling realm, what I call the Ling realm, because the Ling is the end product of the diversification that starts from Yuan Qi to Yin Yang, our realm, and then behind there's the Ling realm. The experience of Ling can feel like as if you see your mother, or it can feel like you see God or something like this. It is also usually bringing you closer to these kind of things with many different kind of drugs that you can take, where your sensation is oversaturated. you're becoming overheated, just like in many rituals, and as a result of that you get into this ecstasy, which eventually can lead to exhaustion of your heart because of the intensity of the bliss that you go through. So that is only something that you can do sparsely to prevent that, besides it becomes a habit, also is going to eventually damage you. So these are what we can call modern pseudo-Daoist claims. Let me talk about a few writers. For instance, the whole idea of sexual practices was first discussed in 1937 by Henri Maspero. Girls, they must come. How you try to pronounce the name Maspero? Maspero in French.
Maspero?
Maspero, yeah. What do you say, Maspero? You try to say Maspero in French?
Maspero.
Maspero? In French? Is that French? No?
Maspero.
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 I actually don't know how to pronounce it.
Maspero.
And he talked about this where he focused on remnants of Chinese text which were coming to him through the Ishimpo text. Akira, how do you say Ishimpo in Japanese? Ishimbo. That is the way how after the Cultural Revolution and before the Cultural Revolution a lot of Chinese medicine text came to Westerners through Japan, because China was not that accessible for Westerners in general. And also modern TCM is to a large degree based on that because of the destruction of Chinese medicine during the Cultural Revolution. Then there is the textbook of Douglas Weil, and he made a book called The Art of the Bedchamber, which came out in 1992, where he put in a lot of different kind of translations from different authors over time, from the pre-Han Dynasty to relatively modern times. And he talks about this, and he shows the different kind of practices and the different kind of ideas that are present in there. So if you are interested in Daoist Tantra, you definitely also have to be educated in these kind of skills. So when people study with me, for instance, I usually introduce them gradually with these kind of ideas, especially when we talk about sexuality. When we talk about the dual cultivation, sexuality is not always required. And as a result of that, it is not normally an issue, but it could happen, right? So at the moment, when we look further, we have a writer like Robert van Gulik, who called these books pillow books. And most of his work was between the 1950s and the 1960s, or in the 1960s. And he talked about dual practice, namely two people practicing together, doing something to get into a particular kind of state. And these books were very close to what you could call the Kama Sutra in India, and these books were mostly from the Qing dynasty, so they are very limited in scope in that sense. But this is the way how it was transferred to the West, and there also, just like in our culture, the pleasure principle was a very important part, and it was also usually a higher class, upper class activity. Of course, the lower classes, the workers, they never had time for anything like that. When we look at sensuality, we can say that it's a form of intense and complete experience of things. So when you touch somebody, or when you touch something, or when you look at something, you completely go into that experience. Usually things like drawing, painting, touching, and so on and so on. These can bring you these kind of sensations by enhancing your senses. So by doing practice to enhance your senses, automatically you come into a state of sensuality. What you see when people grow older is that their senses become a little bit more numb, and their sensual experience of life becomes different. And that then gets lost. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people, they regret a lot of things in their life. So that is an important aspect actually of particular kind of Dao Yin to practice. Then at the moment we talk about tantric practice per se, then we usually see that this is there to help bridge oneself in both the magical realms and the Ling related realms, where information comes together and where we weave ourselves in the different lives we become conscious of. Tantra as a concept is originally Indian, as I already said, yes. But in, for instance, Michael Strickman's magical medicine, he explains how Tantra came into China in the period from the early Han, and maybe a little bit earlier already like that. And they brought with them Buddhist materials, which Taoists first thought they were new Taoist teachings. And later on, this Buddhism formed what is called Tiantai Buddhism, and what later on became also Lamaism and also Chan, Lamaism in the one direction, Chan in the other direction. So they absorbed a lot of Taoist practices. But this Tantrism was a form of witchcraft which was originating from India, and the Taoist as a organized social activity was to a large degree, according to Strickman, meant to correct the damage done by these witches by creating a sort of counter movement or counter activity. So a lot of Taoism is anti-witchcraft practice. And when people talk about Taoist witchcraft, then that is the same like with Catholics. The Catholics went into pogroms to kill witches, but a lot of them, they are also practicing witchcraft to rise up into the echelons of the Catholic Church. These first Taoisms, they were usually ritualist, and in some of these rituals, the pairing of two people, a male and a female, was also playing a role. So in that case, the practice was meant to collect powers in a similar kind of way as the Magi did in the Persian Empire a long time before that, to create fertility for the land. So you could see that in a similar kind of tradition. Not the same, similar. When we look at the weaving of particular kind of qualities, then that is usually a group-based activity. And in a ritual, when you have more people involved, then the whole group goes into that. When you look at music in Asia, that is also a group-based thing. And people have to come together to get to the point where they can actually reach harmony with each other, and as a result of that, create a beautiful piece of music. And if you are talking about dual cultivation with a man and a woman, in a similar kind of fashion, you come together, you start doing all kind of things, you reach harmony, and as a result of the harmony that you reach, you create deeper feelings and connections with things, because you are building connection with things, and through the partnership, you gradually create deeper and stronger connections with it. And that doesn't mean that you go higher, but you go deeper. So you go actually down into things instead of higher into things. And therefore, you do not necessarily create more heat. And therefore, it does not become this ecstatic, mystical experience. People very often think is the same as spiritual development, because this is in fact a form of addiction, because you create an enormous dopamine rush in your brain, and it is the same like developing stress. You become addicted to it, and it is using all the same mechanisms that somebody in the gym does, that somebody does with hard work, but somebody does through arguing all the time, or creating arguments, and so on and so on. So this sexual tantra with ecstasy and stuff like this is not a positive, it's a negative. And people very often, because of the intensity of the feelings, they don't recognize that it is a negative because it feels so good. Like every addict says about what they're doing, it feels so good. And at this moment when they are feeling that it is feeling good, but it is not positive for their health in general, then at that moment they are late or delayed in actually doing something about it because the experience is usually too attractive. It's the same like smoking cigarettes. It's difficult to stop once you've started, even though you know it is not right. What we try to do in this article, in this video, is we try to bridge these aspects, and we use Tantra and Dual Cultivation interchangeably, where we try to show where is the alchemical practice of this. When I was translating textbooks from Daoist and university resources from China about self-cultivation, there were chapters on dual cultivation, there were chapters on female cultivation, and if you understand the differences between male and female and the complexities between these things, you can understand that dual cultivation is not as easy as people usually think, and the psychotherapeutic approach that people in the West usually have, and that a lot of people in China are also taking over, is usually more about emotional gratification than it is actually about the actual change that you want to go through. One of the things, for instance, that I talk about with that is that the sexuality is not required. It is an option, and it can be very practical in some cases, but it is not required. And if you are interested in learning more about it, just contact me. We talk about it and we see what might be possible, what might not be possible to teach you, either on a distance or here in the clinic. Or any other way, we can look about that. Want to do there with the interchangement of these terms is because it is for convenience, right? If I go into all the different details between these two things, I've already said some things, but if I go too much into the details, then at that moment it becomes a topic about that difference instead of what we actually wanted to go to. When we are developing dual cultivation or tantric practice, we have to see that sexuality, sensuality, and the dual cultivation or the tantric practice or ritualism or magic or even witchcraft, they're all intertwined with each other to a degree, and they overlap each other to a particular kind of degree. So it means that in your training you have to work on particular kind of things. Like, for instance, you want to enhance the quality of your senses. Why? Because it helps you to fine-tune for the other person. You also want to do a particular kind of meditation. You want to go do Dantian meditation so that you can control your own yang. That is very important. Otherwise you start producing mental projections inside yourself, and that creates fire, and that is just exactly what we didn't want to do. We wanted to create yang. Yang is warm, fire is hot. And so these are two differences with each other. It's the same as when you're dying. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it says there's two lights what you see when you die. There's the bright light and there's the soft light. The bright lights feel attractive, so you go to the bright light and then you immediately reincarnate as an ant. But the soft light, which is less noticeable, less attractive, because it doesn't appeal to your pleasures principles, then at that moment, that is the one that you have to take on your path to Buddhahood. At the moment when you try to become an immortal, of course, you never get to that point, right? So you have to understand that dual cultivation is there to either become a Buddha or to become an immortal. These are two different kind of goals, so they have different kind of details in their practice. There is the Yuan-Chi meditation you have to learn. You have to learn Ling body practice. You have to learn Tanchuang in a very extensive way, not only this one, but also in the extensions of that, in the Daoyin that belongs to that. And that is what we do in our school within the Zhongwu Qigong, and where you are extensively prepared for. You have to develop your Jing, you have to develop your Shun, and you have to understand what these things mean, and they don't mean essence, energy, and spirit. So that is something that I will just leave in this. You can see other movies in my playlist who deal with that issue as a problem, period. You can just look a few movies back if you go to my Patreon or on my YouTube. It is actually very easy to find, because in many of my videos I complain about that problem.
Well, dear friend, this is the end of part 1. There is a part 2, another, how can I say, 15, 20 minutes, something like this. And this is going more deep into the technical details of these kind of things. And I didn't want to directly bother you with that part in case it is not what is interesting to you. If you are interested in this, there is an option to buy just a simple movie, or you can become a member of the Patreon, paying member. That is And in that case, you will be able to see it also. And this is also as instruction for existing customers, clients, students, and so on, so that they can have a good idea about what it is. And it is also a little bit of an experiment because the video is actually pretty long now. The video is about 37, 38 minutes long, and that is one of the longest videos that I've made so far. But if that format actually is being appreciated by the students, I will do it long or more often. And as a result of that, also this format of splitting it in two will happen more often. So if you are interested, join the channel to have a further look. If you are interested in participating in learning one way or another, whether it's within this topic or in other topics, then of course you are more than welcome. And I'm very happy that you've been looking so far to this movie. Join the channel, give it a like, that helps the channel very much into a process towards monetizing, which I actually will need in a large scale to finance my research. When a lot of people react very positive on this topic, of course, there will also be more about it because I have a lot, because I also translated a lot on this topic, and I have not thought about how to present that outward. So then video actually might be a great idea. So one more time, thank you, join, like, become a member. That will be really great.
Does anybody still have any questions at this moment? Before I mentioned that when we talk about the I Ching, we talk about three layers: the heaven layer, the upper layer, and the earth layer.